He was bold. He was impulsive. He was willing. He was passionate. He was dedicated. He was resolute. He was persuasive. He was influential. He was a leader. He was a man called Peter.
Well, good morning and welcome to SouthCrest this morning. How's everybody doing? All right, fantastic. Well, today we are glad you're here on Kids Day. If you notice, there was a few things in the parking lot. If any of you get bored of my message today, you're welcome to go out there and play and slide and watch kids and stuff like that. I hope you don't. Hopefully it'll be a good time. But yeah, that's going on. And I am so thankful for how many kids and students we have at our church. You know, one thing we call them the next generation, but that's exactly what they are. They are the next generation. When I'm older and can't do this anymore, they'll be the ones stepping up into place and continuing the ministries of the church. And I'm so thankful that we have such a young group that is moving up, rising up within the ranks. It's pretty awesome to see. Well, today we're starting a brand new series called A Man Called Peter. And this series is going to be about the life of the Apostle Peter, who is my favorite Bible character outside of Jesus. Because if we're going to be honest, everybody's favorite Bible character has to be Jesus, right? That's why we're here, because we love Jesus. But outside of Jesus, we have other characters in the Bible we like, and Peter's my favorite. Peter was a disciple. He was a church leader. He was an elder. He's often pointed out by many pastors, and as many Christians have this sense of when they think about Peter as a mess up, as a guy who made all kinds of mistakes. And when we get done with this series, I hope how you view the Apostle Peter is different than maybe you viewed him in the past. Now, a few years ago, I was at home and replacing the brakes on the car that Angie had at that time. And brake replacement is one of those things I don't mind doing. Actually, I often joke, if anybody ever asks me about doing things like that you spend more time jacking the car up and taking the tire off than you actually do changing the brakes. When you get to the brakes, there's two bolts. You take the first one out, you loosen the bottom one, the whole caliper falls out. The caliper is the pushy thing that makes the brake stop, right? You take your pads out, you take a C-clamp, and you push the caliper back in, you put new pads in, slide it back up, tighten the bolt, put the other one in, you're done. Okay, free class on changing brakes, no charge, all right? Saves you about $300 at Midas next time you go, okay? And so that's how you change brakes. And I don't mind doing it, I love doing it. But this car was different. When I went to go push the calipers in, it didn't quite go in the way I was. Because there was some engineer somewhere who decided, hey, every single car in America has their brakes this way, I'm gonna make these different. You know, this is an engineer that was one of those guys who was incredibly book smart, but probably lacked any bit of common sense whatsoever. Have you ever met somebody like that? Super book smart, but no common sense? That was this guy, I'm guaranteed, okay? So I couldn't figure it out, so I did what any natural DIYer would do. I YouTubed it, right? And so I YouTubed it, and I found that this particular caliper, you actually had to spin it as you pushed it back in. And there was this tool the guy had, which is basically a C-clamp, but it had a disc at the end of it that would spin the caliper. So I went to Advanced Auto, and you can rent tools there. And I was like, hey, I want to rent the brake pushy anything. And he goes, yeah, I got one here. And so I rented that. I got home, and I'm a little frustrated at this point. Usually changing brakes takes me 20 minutes. I'm pushing 2 hours right now. And I'm like, okay, this is annoying. But I get the little spinny thing, and I get to the side, and I push it in, and the caliper goes in, put it back together, great. Now, you go to the other side, right? So I get to the other side, go to do that, it won't work. I'm like, what's going on here? Remember that rocket scientist I talked about earlier ago who decided to make calipers retwist them in? He was even more book smart than you and I could ever imagine. Because why would both of them want to turn the same way, right? So the one side turned clockwise, guess what the other side had to do? Turn counterclockwise. Yeah, it had to turn the opposite way. The tool I had is a C-clamp. It only turns one way. If you turn the other way, it loosens. So it wouldn't work. So back to YouTube I go. I get back to YouTube, and there's a guy that has this other device. It's literally a square. little hollow square that goes on the end of a socket. And it has all these different little knobs on it for the different manufacturer's brakes that you need to fit it into. And because it's on a socket, you can turn it both ways. So back to Advanced Auto I go, return the rented tool, get my deposit back, and then I buy this new little socket type tool. Awesome. Go home. Here we go. A few more minutes, I'll be done with this thing. Don't know if you know this about calipers, they're a hydraulic system. And even though you pop the master cylinder and release the hydraulics, it's not easy to push back in. See, when you have a C-clamp and you're turning it, it's a simple machine. Don't know if you remember physics, but a screw is a simple machine. It does all the power by as it rotates. I am not a simple machine. I am weak. I tell you what, 3 hours of me pushing as hard as I could, turning this thing, trying to get it go in. And of course, because it's just a little socket with two little nubs, guess what it does like every time you turn it? It slips, it goes off, like you're slicing your hand up and your other arm up. At the end of the day, I couldn't feel my arm. My hand was bruised from pushing. 6 hours to change these brakes. I was losing my ever-loving mind. Angie came out at one point and was like, I'm going back in. Like, I didn't want to talk to me. I'm like, I am losing my ever-loving mind. But I was determined. I was resolute. I was going to get those brakes changed. Have you ever had a time in your life where something was that way with you? That, it was supposed to be simple. It wasn't supposed to be this hard. Like if you've ever done anything by yourself, that's always the case. I went to hang chair rail in a room to make it a nursery when Joe was born. And so, I found the first stud, measured 16 inches, because that's where you build studs. And I went to go put the chair rail up. Guess what? The guy who built our house, he decided that wall didn't need that many pieces of wood. They were on 24-inch centers. Who knew, It took longer than it was supposed to because where there's supposed to be wood, there wasn't. It was like magical, And so you have those things where you're like, oh my goodness, it's not supposed to be that hard. But some of you were like me, like, I don't care. I don't care how hard it's going to be. I'm going to get it done, right? We like to call that determination. We like to call that resolute. Our spouses call that stubborn, okay? I don't know. But either way you look at it, it's a way that we have to hang in there. We stay the course. We're going to finish this job whether it kills us or not. And some people aren't here today because it killed them, okay? But we tried hard to get that job done. And that's what happens in our lives. We begin to push and push and push to try to get things accomplished. And sometimes we just can't get it there. Now listen. Being determined, being stubborn, being resolute, that's not always a bad quality, okay? If it's for the right purpose, if it's for the right cause, it's an admirable trait. But if it's for the wrong thing, it can become bad. And we're going to see today when we look at the life of Peter that there's some traits that he has that you and I need to have. We need to be more like him in our lives. The question is exactly how does that look and what does that mean? So for some of you in this room who are more experienced than me, which is a polite way of saying older, if you have more experience than me, you might have recognized the name of our sermon series, A Man Called Peter. It's not original. I didn't come up with that. It's not super complicated, but it's not my own. It's actually a book, later made into a movie, about the life of a guy named Peter Marshall. You may recognize the name Peter Marshall. I quote him often in my sermons. Peter Marshall was a Scottish pastor who was born in Scotland, in Coalbridge, Scotland, which is a mining town, hence the name Coalbridge. They mine, guess what? Coal, okay? That's what they mine there. And Peter, like many people there, worked in the mines during the day, but Peter felt God called him to something more, started studying theology, wanted to become a pastor. A cousin of his was like, hey, you're not going to make it work by doing this like half and half thing. Paid for him to come to America and attend Columbia Seminary in New York. And so Peter Marshall moved to America, went to seminary there, and his first church that he took a job at was a small church in a town some of you may have heard of. It's called Covington, Georgia. That is where he started his first church. It was in Covington, Georgia. He was called there, was a pastor there. He was a pastor just for a little while when a church in Atlanta, which was Westminster Presbyterian Church in Atlanta, called him to be pastor of that church. That's where he met his wife, Catherine. Catherine's the one who wrote the book called A Man Called Peter. It's a biography of her husband's life. And there they had their son, who also was named Peter Marshall Jr. And so while they were there, they began doing a lot of ministry. Peter was later called, 9 years later, he was called to be the pastor of New York Avenue Presbyterian Church in our nation's capital. He was pastor there for quite a while, and after 9 years of being pastor there, he was called to be chaplain of the U.S. Senate. And as chaplain of the U.S. Senate, he did that for just over 2 years when he died unexpectedly of a heart attack at age 46. Now, I tell you all this about Peter Marshall because I had to watch that movie when I was a kid because my grandfather wanted me to watch it. So apparently, on December 7th, 1941, that's a date some of you may recognize. Hopefully you recognize that date. Just before Pearl Harbor was bombed, Peter Marshall spoke at the United States Naval Academy. He was asked to preach the morning message there, and so he got up and he went to preach the message there. And he woke up that morning with a sermon prepared, and he said, I just have this feeling inside of me that something's bad happening today. So he changed his sermon. He changed his sermon, what he was going to preach that day, and he ended up preaching out of James 4, where it talks about our life is just a mist, here for a moment. And it was, that sermon was called Go Down Death. Hours after he preached that sermon, the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. But in attendance that day in that Naval Academy was a young Scottish lad by the name of John Donaldson. John Donaldson was my grandfather. And he, like many of his classmates, graduated early from the Naval Academy, a year early, so they could go join the war effort. And little did they know that morning, as they listened to Peter Marshall preach, that they would be shipped over, many of them never to come home, to go fight in World War II. You see, so Peter Marshall, it was very much like Peter the disciple, a person who was called by God to leave a life that he once knew to become a person who followed after Jesus. And the thing is, each and every one of you in here today, listening to my voice, everyone online hearing what I'm saying, has been called by God to do something. You have a purpose in your life, a plan for your life. God's determined that. The question is, how do we respond to that call? How do we listen to what God said and say, you know what, I'm going to go and do what he's told me to do? So we're going to look at the life of Peter to see how Peter responded to that call, to see how you and I should probably respond to that call. The very first thing you see about Peter was that he was willing. Peter was willing. Luke 5, verses 1 through 11. It says, while Jesus was standing by the lake of Gennesaret, we might have a translation issue here. Many people pushed to get near him. They wanted to hear the word of God. And he saw two boats by the lake, but the fishermen had gone out of them and were washing their nets. Getting into one of the boats, which was Simon's, he asked him to put out a little bit from the land, and he sat down and taught the people from the boat. And when he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, put out into the deep and let down your nets for a catch. And Simon answered, Master, we toiled all night and took nothing, but at your word I will let down the nets. And when they had done this, they enclosed a large number of fish, and their nets were breaking. They signaled to their partners in the other boat to come and help them, and they came all filled both the boats so that they began to sink. But when Simon Peter saw it, he fell down at Jesus' knees, saying, depart from me, for I am a sinful man, O Lord. For he and all who were with him were astonished at the catch of fish they had taken. And so also were James and John, sons of Zebedee, who were partners with Simon. And Jesus said to Simon, do not be afraid, for now on you will be catching men. And when they had brought their boats to land, they left everything and followed him. So from this passage, we see Peter, a man just working to earn his living, right? He woke up that day like it was any other day. He was a fisherman. Guess what he was going to do that day? He was going to fish, okay? Only problem was that he was soon to have his life interrupted by Jesus. That's what happens to us, right? We wake up in the morning, think we have a normal day, and then Jesus steps in and he interrupts our life. He calls us to do something. He shows us something we need to respond to. Peter's sitting there mending his nets, and this strange dude he's never met before walks up and says, hey, can I hop in your boat so I can teach these people? Peter's like, yeah, sure, no big deal, right? I mean, Peter's thinking, I can mend my nets in the boat just as good as I can mend them right here. I'll just hop in the boat and mend nets as he's talkie. So they do that, Jesus is talking, and then he looks at Peter and says, hey, let's go fishing. All right, now, I don't know if you've been around fishermen before, okay? I'm not talking about a guy who likes to go fish on the lake on the weekends. I'm talking about a man who fishes for a living. You know what he smells like? Fish. You know what he looks like? Fish. I mean, these guys, there's a thing about me like, that's a fisherman, all right? You can just tell by the way they walk, carry themselves, they're fishermen. Jesus does not have that look. Jesus was a carpenter. He doesn't know about fishing. And he's like, hey, let's go fishing. Peter's like, oh, okay, so funny story. I've been fishing all night. Guess what I caught? Nada, zilch, nothing. Haven't caught anything. But you want to go fishing. You who've never fished before in your life, now want to go fishing. Sure, why not? Because you said so, we'll go out. So they go out fishing, guess what they do? They catch more fish than they've ever caught in their entire lives. So much fish they have to call their friends over. Both boats are about to sink because of all the fish. And what does Peter do? You know what Peter does right there? I don't want you to miss this. This is super important and super unique. I think people glaze over this all the time. Peter says what? In verse 8, when Simon Peter saw it, he fell down at Jesus' knees saying, depart from me, for I am a sinful man, O Lord. Peter We're going to see later where he says, you are the Christ, the Messiah. Peter knew it right then at that moment, who he was. Listen, if he didn't, he wouldn't answer the way he did. He'd be like, dude, I don't know who you are, but you are scaring me. This is weird. Is it a coincidence? No. He says, I am a sinful man, depart from me. You know the only person you claim that you're a sinner to? God. If any of you come and hang out with me at my house at some point, I'm not like, hey, by the way, I'm a sinful man, you might want to depart from me, okay? I don't say that because people don't say that. But this is what Peter's response was. A man steps on his boat, does a miracle. His first response was, this is God. This is God in man form. I need you to depart because I am a sinful man. He knew right then and there that this was Jesus. And you can tell this because after Jesus did all that stuff, what did Jesus ask Peter to do? Come and follow me. And what did Peter do? Well, you know, it's going to be complicated, God. Maybe a couple of weeks I can come do that. I got to put stuff in order. I got to take care of some business. No, what did he do? He was willing. He was willing to leave his job. He was willing to leave his family. Willing to leave all of his possessions, all to follow Jesus. On the spot, right there. Gone. Done. I'm out. Listen, following Jesus is hard. It will cost us something. It has to cost us something. If following Jesus doesn't cost you something, you're not following Jesus. You're following an idea in your mind of what you want Jesus to be. Following Jesus always costs us something. It cost Peter everything. You know what he thought about that? No big deal. Let's go. The second thing that we see about Peter is that Peter was passionate. Mark 8, 27 through 33 puts it this way. And Jesus went on with his disciples to the village of Caesarea Philippi. On the way, he asked his disciples, who do people say that I am? And they told him, John the Baptist, others said Elijah, and others, one of the prophets. And he asked them, but who do you say that I am? Peter answered him, you are the Christ. And he strictly charged them to tell no one about him. And he began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and the chief priests and the scribes and be killed and after 3 days rise again. And he said this plainly, and Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But turning and seeing his disciples, he rebuked Peter and said, get behind me, Satan, for you're not setting your mind on the things of God, but on the things of man. These verses right here are a perfect example of what we saw as kids in cartoons, right? Your favorite cartoon, Bugs Bunny, Daffy Duck, it didn't matter who the character was, right? At some point, two things popped on their shoulders. One was a little angel and one was a little devil, right? Right? So what we see happening here is Jesus is asking his disciples, who do people say I am? Well, they say this, this, and this. Who do you say I am? Peter says, you are the Christ. Little angel on his shoulder was like, you know who he is. You saw that catch a fish. You've known for a long time who he is. He's like, yeah, you are the Christ. You are the Messiah, right? Boom. Angel shoulder, +1, right? Because score. But a little bit later, as Jesus is teaching, and he says he's going to have to suffer and die, guess what? Little devil pops up. You right here, little horns. They always are red and have horns. I don't know why. I don't know where you got that image from, but it is, okay? There's other things that I read that have that horns. Stay away from them, okay? This is a sign. Red Bull gives you wings. No, it doesn't. Devil don't have wings, okay? It doesn't give you wings, all right? But anyway, little devil stops up and says, hey, you got to stop him from this talk. Listen, there's a reason it was Peter who said that. 3 people in this world were closer to Jesus than any other. You know who they were? Peter, James, and John. Peter's fishing partners, the sons of Zebedee. If anybody in the history of this world could have had a conversation with Jesus and influenced him to do something different than what he planned to do, it was Peter. James and John were too meek. Peter's the only person, the devil looked around and said, if anybody could stop Jesus from dying on a cross, from beating me, it's Peter. So he got into Peter's mind and said, hey, you need to stop him from doing this. This is foolishness. That's what the devil does in our lives, right? He comes in and he says things that aren't true, but sound good for us. Hey, Peter, if Jesus dies, he won't be with you anymore. You want him near you. You want him by you. Peter's like, yeah, I don't want to lose Jesus. Yeah, hey, you're not going to do that. Because what does Peter call out? He says, get behind me, Satan. He's not calling Peter Satan. He's talking about his motive. And the motive comes from the devil. It's selfish. It's about what I want, not about what God wants. And so Peter finds himself in this situation. He's passionate though. Listen, there may be disagreements on who Peter is. There may be disagreements on the quality of man that he was. But there's certain things about Peter that are undeniable. Peter was a man of action. No one can deny that. If they do, they've never opened the Bible, ever. Peter was a man of action. He often spoke first, thought 3 or 4 days later. Okay, he just was, I'm gonna do things. And when faced with a situation, he moved. That was passion that drove him though. Look there was nobody who wanted Jesus to succeed more than Peter. He was passionate for who Christ was, his mission. But because of that quickness, it didn't leave him a lot of time to think sometimes. And he jumped in too quickly. Passion is a great quality for a follower of Jesus to have. But passion, untempered, can make the truth repulsive. Let me say that again. Passion, untempered, can make the truth repulsive. There are many people on social media who love Jesus. And the minute they see something, they attack. They're passionate, right? That no one's ever been like, you know what? That guy cussed me out and told me that Jesus loved me at the same time. He must be right. I'm going to give my life to Christ now. It's never happened. Never happened, okay? Not going to happen. We have to learn to use that passion correctly. You see, Peter was focused on the now. What was Jesus focused on? Eternity. We have to learn to place our passion in the right place. Will we make mistakes like Peter? Absolutely. If we're passionate for Jesus, we're going to make mistakes. But Peter Marshall, remember that guy? He said this one time. It is better to fail in a cause that will ultimately succeed than to succeed in a cause that will ultimately fail. I'll be wrong for Jesus anytime. Because the success of Jesus and his mission isn't dependent on me. He uses me. I'm going to mess up. I'm going to fail. Some of you may have failed or messed up in your life. Maybe not. Maybe you guys are a little better than I am. That's fine. But that's going to happen. But I would rather fail at something that's going to succeed than succeed at something that's going to, in the end, not matter. Peter had passion to follow after him. And that's what drives us to do what Jesus wants. We should desire what he wants more and more every day in our lives. That passion should grow us and make us more like him. But we have to make sure as we grow in that passion that we don't drive people away, that we draw them closer to God. And the last thing I want to look about Peter that we're going to learn today about him is that Peter was resolute. Matthew 26 says it this way. Jesus said to him, friend, do what you came to do, talking about Judas. Then they came up and laid hands on Jesus and seized him. And behold, one of those who were with Jesus stretched out his hand and drew his sword and struck the servant of the high priest and cut off his ear. Then Jesus said to him, put your sword back into its place, for all who take the sword will perish by the sword. Do you think that I cannot appeal to my Father and he will at once send me more than 12 legions of angels? But how then should the scriptures be fulfilled that it must be so? In Matthew's account, it doesn't say that Peter's the one who drew his sword. I think Matthew was afraid of Peter. He didn't want to write that down, okay? But when you read the account in the book of John, John says it was Peter, all right? Peter and John, if you read scripture enough, you realize they were partners in a business. They were like BFFs, but it was a very competitive friendship. You have one of those? Like your buddy, you're like, I'm gonna outdo you, you're gonna outdo me, right? I mean, we see it's like when the empty tomb, Peter and John ran for the tomb, and John, who was much younger and faster than Peter, got there first, right? We see that. And here's what John's doing too. He's like, Peter did it. He did it. He's the one who cut the guy's ear off. It was Peter. Look, I get it. My brothers were the same way growing up. Man, something happened in my house, my brothers would be like, Peter did it. He did it. I'm like, what? Seriously? You know? I'm used to that. And that's what John's doing. Here's just pointing it out. I'm not afraid. He did it. It was his fault. And that's what we're seeing happen here. But that's what we need to understand. Here's what I want you to understand about this. Peter was resolute. He was determined to do anything to help Jesus with his mission. Peter didn't fully understand the mission. Peter thought the mission was what? Going town to town, teaching people, healing people, all this type of stuff. He didn't understand the ultimate mission was that Jesus had to die. So Peter's like, I got to keep Jesus safe. We got to go to the next town. So what does Peter do? He gets up and he hacks off a dude's ear. Now, if you've heard me talk about Peter before in other sermons, I'll just do a quick synopsis. Peter was a beast of a man. I don't know what you think about Peter as a fisherman. Think of like the biggest WWE wrestler, football player you've ever seen in your life. Go a size bigger, that was Peter. How do I know that? Real quick, John, they're fishing. They catch some fish. Peter's already swum ashore to see Jesus. It says 4 guys couldn't bring the nets in. 4 grown men who were fishermen for their lives couldn't bring it in. What does Peter do? He goes over and pulls the net in by himself. All right? Peter did what 4 guys couldn't do. And they've been 4 guys like me, doesn't matter. If one guy can do what 4 guys can't, he's a hoss. Okay, that's a southern term for you. You can use that one if you've never heard. He's a hoss. He's a big dude. I pointed back to this before in that sermon. He goes and he hacks off a dude's ear. These are soldiers. These are palace guards, probably accompanied by Roman soldiers. Peter with a sword stands there and chops a dude's ear. They're like, oh, well, guess that happened. No, look it. Go up to a police officer and a group of police officers and punch him in the face. See what happens. You will not be on your feet for long. They will tackle you and cuff you and take you away. Peter chops the dude's ear off. They're like, you know what? That was bad for that guy. Because they didn't want none of Peter. He's a monster. All right? They're like, no, I'm good. You can take him. No, we're good. And Jesus steps up, puts the dude's ear back on, like, hey, no harm, no foul, right? We're good, right? This is Peter, okay? And so he's like, I'm going to stop this. And if he wanted to, he would have stopped it. Jesus had to calm him down. No, I got it, bro. Don't worry about it, okay? I got this one. You just chill, all right? But listen, he's going to respond. He's going to step in. He's going to do things. But the more I study the life of Peter, who he was and how he responded, I have some thoughts here. And I'm going to share these thoughts with you on this resolute topic today. And you can completely ignore me if you want to, because these are contrary to a lot of things you may have been taught in the past. And a lot of this is just stuff that I've gotten from studying myself. I haven't read anybody who agrees with me for the most part, but this is just what I feel the Lord has told me about this man, Peter. So I'm going to share them with you today. Again, if it doesn't do you any good, take the first 2 points, know Peter was determined, and move on. But here's my thinkings on this. I don't think Peter was the only disciple to deny Jesus. All right? I don't think he was. If we read that passage, I want to see what we just read in that passage. Verse 31 says this. But he said emphatically, Peter, if I must die with you, I will not deny you. Does it not end there? No, it doesn't. What does it say after that? And they all said the same. Who was the all? All the other disciples. They all said the same. All the other disciples said, we will never leave you or deny you, Jesus. Okay? You got that? Do we agree on that? We just read it in black and white. We agree it, right? Okay. When they took Jesus to the high priest's house to be tried, how many disciples were there? 1, a man called Peter. Where'd the other disciples go? They'll never leave him or deny him. Where'd they go? They ghosted him. They're like, I ain't doing this no more. They denied Jesus way before Peter ever did. They didn't even show up. Peter was the only one there by himself. The rest had gone long before that. Second, Peter's denial about Jesus wasn't denying Jesus. Let me say this. At no point in Peter's denial did he ever say he didn't love Jesus. At no point in Peter's denial did he ever say, I don't believe in Jesus. Peter simply said, I don't know him. Can we do some thinking on this? Just a little logical thinking on this, if we may, right? Peter was once again trying to do things his own way in that moment. I firmly believe this. Peter was trying to do things his way. What was God's way? What was God's plan for Jesus? That he'd be tried, crucified, buried, and then 3rd day rise again. Peter's not privy to this information, all right? He was trying to figure out, okay, how do I bust Jesus out of jail? How do I get him out of jail? How do I free Jesus in this moment? I'm going there so I can see an opportunity for me to do something about this. So when people ask Peter, do you know Jesus? He's like, no, I don't know him. All right? Where were they? Did y'all remember what I just said where they were? At the house of the high priest. About 30 minutes before Peter got to the house of the high priest, what did he just do? The guard for the high priest lost an ear via Peter. Now he is at that guy's stronghold with all the guards. Look, he is like doing espionage 101 here. I am going where my enemies are. Of course he's going to deny Jesus. If you're trying to break somebody out of jail, you can't do that if you're arrested. You can't break somebody out of jail if you're in jail. So Peter's like, how do I do this? I'm going to take this in my own hands. I'm going to free Jesus. I'm going to figure it out. And so I'm going to tell people I don't know who he is until the right moment, and then I'm going to bust him out of here. Again, this is what I believe. He was strong like that. He denied Jesus so he could help Jesus later on. And thirdly, and this one is a total shot in the dark, even for me, okay? This is out there. But based on what I know about Peter, it's something I couldn't believe what happened. Based on Peter's recent behavior, if he couldn't break him out of jail that night, then he could have started a riot to free him from the cross. Okay, bear with me. There are people in this time that were called zealots. You know what they hated more than anything else in the world? The Roman Empire. Peter could have gone to these zealots and said, hey, a friend of mine's going to get crucified on Sunday. I'm going to free him. Will y'all help me? Look, they were going to help him because of Jesus. Wait, you're giving me a chance to go kill Romans? We're there. We're with you. So I believe Peter would have gotten a mob together, attacked a small patrol crucifying Jesus, and freed Jesus before he got hung on the cross. This is just what I'm seeing here, what I'm reading here, right? But something happens in that moment when the rooster crows and Peter realizes what Jesus had told him, you deny me 3 times. In one of the Gospels, it says Jesus looked at Peter. In the other 2, it says Peter remembered what Jesus said, but it broke him. In that moment, he broke. He was like, you know what? I can't do this. And he left. He was so broken that there would be no riot. There would be no flash mob at the cross. He was just like, I can't do this. I let Jesus down again. This is what's going on in his mind. Listen, Peter was determined to save Jesus. He was resolute. We did the Lord's Supper last week, right? During the Lord's Supper, Jesus actually said, the person who I dunked this bread into and give is the one who's going to betray me. And he gave it to Judas. And what happened? Nothing. Judas got up and left. And they all thought he was going to go do business because he was the guy with the money bag. Jesus just said, whoever I give this to betrays me, gave it to Judas, just up. See, Jesus kept the disciples from understanding things, because here's why. If Peter would have understood what Jesus was about to do, hey, he just said the betrayer is who I gave the bread to, he just gave it to Judas, Judas is not leaving. You know what would have happened? Judas would have left, and Peter would be like, excuse me, I have to go to the bathroom. Peter would have gotten up and followed Judas somewhere. And somewhere in Jerusalem, in some dark alley, would be the body, the dead body of Judas, because Peter would have killed him so he couldn't betray Jesus. You see, Jesus had to hold Peter back a lot. But it was because he was willing, passionate, and resolute. These attributes of Peter we discussed are not bad things. As a matter of fact, if you want to follow Jesus, they're essential that you have them. You cannot follow Jesus if you're not willing to. You cannot follow Jesus if you don't have passion for him. And you cannot follow Jesus if you're not determined to, because life will be hard. You have to have those attributes. So then why does it all go bad for Peter, right? Why does Peter tend to make all the mistakes? Let me see if I can help answer the question this morning. Any of you know what a laser is? You know, like Star Wars, pew, pew, like lasers, right? You know what they are? If I were to ask you what lasers are, most of you would respond back to me as focused light. And you would be pretty much wrong at that answer, okay? If we take all the light in this room and we focus it, you know what we will not have? We will not have a laser. We'll have a bright light, but it will not be a laser. A laser is actually focused, coherent light. Like, great, what in the world is coherent? I'm glad you asked, because I'm going to explain it to you. If you think of light as a wave, because that's this, right? Woo, it's a wave. We're surfing on the light wave, okay? That's a wave. Light is all these different colors, all these different spectrums. Coherent light is light that is, if you were to look at it as a picture, all the waves match up. It's coherent. They're all in perfect synchronization. And when light becomes coherent, when light becomes in perfect synchronization, it now becomes a laser. It's intense, focused, coherent light. In other words, a laser is only a laser because it is in sync with something else. It's not on its own, it is in sync with something else. And you and I can only be effective if we are in sync with Jesus. If we want to have an impact on this world like a laser might have on a piece of metal, it has to be in sync. We have to be in sync with Jesus. Peter, for all of his willingness, for all of his passion, for all of his determination, was only effective for Jesus when he was in sync with Jesus. He performed miracles as long as he was in sync with Jesus. Hey, he walked on water because he was in sync with Jesus. But the minute he took his eyes off Jesus, the minute he got out of sync with Jesus, what happened? He started to sink. Our life is only effective when we're in sync with Jesus, when we're focused on who he is and walking with him day by day, step by step. That's how it happens. I need you to hear this today. No matter how hard you try and want God's will to happen, no matter how much you love God, no matter how much you're determined to stay true to him, if you lose sight of him, if you get out of sync with him, you won't be able to do any of those other things. It will not be effective. Listen, the Pharisees were passionate. They loved the law. They loved teaching the law. They loved holding people to the law, but they got nobody into heaven. Dude on the street corner with a megaphone screaming at his cars as they go by is not effective. He's passionate. He's determined. And 50 years ago, before AC was a standard option in every car, people may have heard him. But nowadays, that's not the case, right? Nowadays, all of us got our windows rolled up in the car by ourselves with a mask on, because that's just cool, right? And no one hears what the guy's saying. You hear, and you crank your music up even louder. They are super passionate people, but they're not effective at all. If anything, people are like, I don't want anything to do with people who believe like that. All of those things, without being in synchronization with Jesus, are useless. But people who share their life, people who love others as Jesus did, people are who in sync with Jesus, they're the effective ones. Look at these attributes that we've talked about today. This willingness, this passion, this resoluteness are going to be the things that Peter builds the next two areas of his life on, which is a church leader and an elder. They are the foundation, which is why Jesus looked at Peter above everyone else and said, you will lead my church. Because you have what no one else has. You have these three things, and man, when you put them to use for me, you are unstoppable. Listen, no matter what God has called you to do, we need to be like Peter. Willing, focused, passionate, determined. Whatever it is God's called you to do, whatever that is in your life, if you will live this way, look after God and be in sync with him, you will accomplish more than you could ever imagine. I will say this, if you get in sync with Jesus and do what he's called you to do, nothing in this world can stop you from succeeding. Because he who's greater in this world is in you making it happen, and nothing can stop you. Our question today, will you get in sync with Jesus? Bye. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, God, I thank you so much that you share this life of Peter in your scriptures. God, he was a man just like us. He wasn't perfect. He made mistakes. God, he tried really hard. And God, I pray that we could become more like him. God, that we would have that same kind of passion. God, that we would be willing when we hear your voice that we drop it all and follow after you. And God, that when you've set us on a course, that God, we would be resolute and determined. God, to stay that course. But God, above all of that, help us to be connected to you each day. God, help us to be in sync with you. Help us to be close to you. Help us to focus all of that energy onto what you've called us to do. God, help us to love people, see people the way that you do. Help us to change that perspective. And God, when we make a mistake, let's just move past it. God, it's a way for you to teach us, it's a way for us to grow. God, it's the way that you want to see us move closer to you. God, because we know what happens in the end. And God, you're worth it. Jesus, I pray right now, if there's anyone in this room who's not in sync with you, God, whether this is their first day in church or they've been in church their entire life, God, that doesn't mean anything. What matters is our relationship to you and whether or not we're close to you. if we're in relationship. God, if we've called you Master, God, if we called you Lord and Savior of our life. And God, there's no one in this room today who hasn't done that. God, that today would be the day, God, that they get in sync with you. Let today be the day that they rededicate their lives, that they refocus all their energy, God, into doing what you've called them to do. Jesus, thank you for Peter and lessons we can learn from him. And God, thank you that you love us as much as you loved him. God, in your name, we pray these things. Amen.